All right, we're now moving on in our what do we call phase 2B. Phase 2 was our trial this morning, and this is phase 2B, the adult working session version. And we would be remiss if we didn't bring Mr. Lindsey, who not only is our trial defense attorney, and we saw some really neat moves in that closing argument that we talked about. But not only that, his wife wrote the adaptation of the facts from the graduation day movie so we could turn it into a trial. For example, the driver lives through the accident. And him and his wife put that together years ago, and they put a lot of hard work into that. And it stood the test of time. The verdict goes back and forth. You know, we never know how it's going to come out. Having said that, I really want to hear what you have to say in follow-up to what Judge Durr said about the evolution of the law, and you actually were working when he was an attorney back then. So do you have anything else you want to add to what Judge Durr said about the law and whether it should be or what it should be?
Well, the only problem I have with the law is the fact is that the results, the consequences don't matter under the circumstances. It's a mandatory 3 to 6 years, as the judge said. So you have a situation where a person is driving an automobile, they're under the influence, they fall asleep, cross the center line, run into a phone pole, they wind up getting what's called ARD, which is a deferred prosecution program.
Correct.
Where you can
just to help our viewers, accelerated rehabilitative disposition.
It's a mouthful.
Right. I don't want to say that for the camera.
But the legal community just says ARD.
You're right, I know.
First-time offender for a DUI is going to get ARD, which means that they'll lose their license for a certain period of time, and they will have a kind of an informal probation. If they complete it, the case is dismissed.
And expunged.
And expunged. But if the circumstances are very slightly different, that it go through the same scenario, same conduct on the part of the driver, has too much to drink, falls asleep, but when he crosses the center line, he hits another automobile head on. The conduct is the same, but he gets a mandatory 3 to 6 years in prison.
Which the person he hit died in that
That's
hypothetical,
correct.
Right?
And that's the problem I have with it.
So you're saying the punishment doesn't relate to the culpability,
to the conduct,
to the culpability,
the
mens rea.
The punishment does not connect with the conduct. It's just the results.
Just by accident.
By chance.
Right.
And I have defended a number of people on this. This particular point that we made here, where you defend based on the it's a DUI, but it did not cause the accident. We've had some successful defenses because juries recognize of the unfairness of that.
Okay, I can hear a prosecutor, though. I used to be a prosecutor, and I know you were too.
Yeah.
I can hear a prosecutor saying, yeah, the conduct doesn't match in those two hypotheticals, but I can also hear lobbyists saying the conduct was getting in the car under the influence.
No, I understand, but I'm just saying
right.
that the conduct is exactly the same.
Right.
One guy gets the case dismissed, the other guy gets a mandatory 3 to 6 years in jail.
And can I mention something else, a caveat on ARD? There's a lot of law review articles out there right now, and I knew you're a defense attorney. You've been a defense attorney for how long now?
40 years.
You were a U.S. attorney
Yes.
as a prosecutor. You were a prosecutor in Butler County.
That's correct.
How many years did you spend on the prosecution side?
8 years.
8. Okay.
3 years as a state prosecutor, 5 years as a federal prosecutor.
And so the rest of your career has been defense.
Correct.
And also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, you taught trial tactics at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law for several years.
For about 30 years.
Okay. And taught CLE classes with me and whatnot. Having said that, as a defense attorney, there's a lot of law articles out there saying that defense attorneys quickly reach for the ARD button without checking out whether there's a Sixth Amendment defense to the case. Have you found that to be true?
Well, it's pretty hard if you're talking to your client and you go into this ARD program where you don't have to admit guilt theoretically, although a lot of judges do demand it. You go into the ARD program and you get the case dismissed. So I have a client comes to me, generally not with a DUI because they're pretty cut and dry, but a lot of other cases, client comes to you, they say they're not guilty, and you say, I can defend you on that, but here's the problem. The best case scenario for you is we go into a trial, you pay me a bundle of money, because I'm going to charge to do that, and you undergo the stress of whether you will win or not, and you may be convicted. And if you get convicted, you're going to do some time, probably. And on the other hand, here's this program over here, which you don't have to pay me to go to trial, and you don't have the risk of being convicted, and you ain't going to jail, and it's the same result in the end as if I gave you the best doggone defense in the world. It's pretty hard to encourage the client.
With a guaranteed result.
Yeah, well, to go to trial. Now, some people do. I have a client, I'm going to try a case 2 weeks from now where a guy was offered ARD and he said he will not take it because he was not guilty and he has a principle. And that's the risk that he's undergoing. But that's the problem with defending it.
I would like to take a moment to clean up the image, though, too, that someone's paying to be found not guilty. The reason why it costs more money is there's more work for the attorney. First of all, every DUI or whatever starts with the information. It goes to a preliminary arraignment, preliminary hearing, the formal arraignment. Then you've got a deadline for bill of particulars, discovery, motion, an omnibus motion, call to trial 2 or 3 times before you even get to pick a jury. And so it's not that someone has to pay more to assert their rights. They have to pay to show up in court to have an attorney for more often. I want to make sure that people don't get the impression that the attorney is making someone pay for their quest for freedom, you know.
Well, that's fine. But as a lawyer, there are public defenders and then there are private lawyers. And if you want a private lawyer, you have to pay. That's the way the system is
And again,
set
for
up.
the purpose of our video, to get a public defender, you would not have a job. Not just everybody qualifies for a public defender.
Right.
And
But you've raised, I'll tell you something you've raised. One of the, I think, the worst problems in our judicial, legal, the criminal justice system is this excessive plea bargaining. People get charged, they come into my office and they say they're not guilty and they want a defense. And I like to say with our law firm, people don't come to our law firm to plead guilty to a crime they did not commit. However, it's astounding how many clients are put in a position where they hire lawyers and the lawyers want a plea bargain. It's almost like it's part of the criminal justice system. And the result of it is a breakdown in the quality of representation, both on the prosecution side, the defense side, and the judges. See, trials, when you put the state to the effort of trying a case, they do a better job investigating, they do a better job of presenting the evidence, the judges do a better job. But it's gotten to the point in so many places that it's anticipated you're going to work out some kind of deal. You're not actually going to put people to trial. And it's caused, I think, to a large extent, to the great detriment in the quality of justice that people get. I think that a jury trial is the litmus test of justice, and you should be able to present it. But in any event, my thinking is that so many of these cases you have, I like to say my clients come in 3 basic categories. Someone who's guilty as can be, someone as pure as the driven snow, and someone who's guilty of something but not what they say. And that's what the vast majority of people are. They've done something but not what they say. They come in, they're charged with a very serious felony, and you realize this should be a misdemeanor. I had a couple weeks ago, I had a guy that was charged with originally an aggravated assault. He fired weapons, but I said all he was doing was mad and fired a weapon into jail, and it should be disorderly conduct. So they charged him. He went through the expense of hiring me. We were prepared to try the case, and then it came down, they pled him to a disorderly conduct, $300 fine. But see, they charged him, and I tell my clients, they come in and they're shocked that they've been charged with a crime. And the law enforcement's very, very aggressive now. And I'm sorry to say this, but to a large extent, I think they need to justify that they're doing. The crime rates are falling, see. And so we get these very heavy-duty charges, and they plea bargain down as part of the system. Let's whack the guy with a big crime, and eventually he'll plead to something.
And someday,
Don Goodwin
will be filming something out here and putting it online about us talking about prosecutorial discretion. That's for another day.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. However, we need to ask you one thing, and this came up in one of our trials. You had experience in talking to the kids about not drinking for a different reason.
Right.
Can you please replate that story to our camera?
I will start with this. When we had this situation today, the message that goes out to these young people is you can't get drunk and drive because people die. It's a great message. But there's a whole other aspects to teenage drinking and young adult drinking, and that is people die simply from drinking. And the young people don't get that, they're not familiar with it, and they're not instructed on it. Here's the deal. The story is one of our neighbors lives right out the end of our driveway. I have a long driveway. They had a number of children. I've known the mother for as long as I remember. Two of their daughters were identical twins, and they were wonderful girls. They were top students. They were cheerleaders. They were pretty. Great, but they're identical, the two of them. And they were freshmen at IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and they were invited to a holiday Christmas party in Indiana at the college. And they were told by their parents that they did not want them to go, but their older brother, being a nice older brother, took them to the party. And very much like what was shown in your video, there was a lot of drinking at the party. And these were small girls, and one of them got very sleepy and went and laid down. And when they came to check on her several hours later, she was gone. She had died. And she had a very high blood alcohol content, very high blood alcohol content. I remember going to the funeral home. It's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. Here's this wonderful girl who has died, and she's laying in the coffin, and standing next to the coffin is the other identical twin. And you're standing there looking at this beautiful girl standing there and this beautiful girl in the coffin looking the same. You want to talk about a heartbreak. It was very, very, very sad. And I got to thinking about this situation, and you know, during the holiday season, we hear the fraternity hazing incidents where someone gets too much alcohol and died, and we get young women. I like to say this, that what occurs with these cases, young people do not understand that when you get to a certain blood alcohol level, your system shuts down. You become intoxicated at 0.16 or whatever it gets up, but once you get up around 0.40, you're courting death. I don't think that people understand that. And there's what I call vodka, which is the odorless, tasteless co-ed killer. And what happens at these parties, you get the linebacker, he weighs 240 pounds, and he's drinking beer. And he brings his girlfriend who's unfamiliar with drinking. She doesn't like beer because, she's never tasted it or whatever. And they get these red cups, these red plastic cups?
Yeah.
And what they do is he's getting it filled with beer, and they make a concoction for her, which is generally some form of cranberry juice with about 3 or 4 shots of vodka. Now, if she's drinking, say, 2 shots of vodka and he's drinking a beer, the same size cups, she is drinking at that point, because of the body weight, because she weighs half as much as he does, she's drinking twice as much alcohol for her body weight. And then if there's 2 or 3 shots, that ups the ante, so it's like 4 or 5 times. And he's pacing her. He's drinking his beer, she's drinking this mixture, and the mixture tastes good. It's just basically fruit juice. And so he winds up with a blood alcohol of 0.10, and she winds up with a blood alcohol of 0.4. And so she dies. And I just think that young people particularly, need to understand drinking and need to understand that it's serious business. I am not a teetotaler, but boy, I respect alcohol. Alcohol, what it does, someone told me, and I think this is true, you drink enough alcohol and you can undo about 200,000 years of evolution. Because what it does is it shuts off the cerebral, the thinking parts of your brain. And it also, one of the things about alcohol, a lot of people don't understand, the first thing that's affected by alcohol is that portion of your brain that deals with inhibitions. I would say in a car we have a governor. You can rev that engine so hard. But with alcohol, your emotions get, you lose the emotions. The governor, the inhibition center in your brain is deadened or anesthetized, and consequently you do things you wouldn't ordinarily do. And we all know what that is. Some people get pugilistic or they want to fight. Some people get very amorous. They lose the inhibitions to keep them from doing that. People argue, people cry, all of those things because of that. But what you need to understand, when you're drinking, you're losing the inhibitions and you're drinking more and more because you don't care anymore. So all I've tried to say, the message that I like to get out or preach about is young people need to understand when they're 17, 18, 19, when they're going to fraternity parties, when they're out drinking with their friends, you can die. And that's my point.
And so most kids experience that first time they really got sick.
Yeah.
And that's just nothing but luck that they didn't drink enough to die.
It depends on what they're
Yeah.
drinking, of course. Their body size depends on a whole lot of things. But it's scary. It happens all the time. You hear a hazing, they get these pledges and they get them drinking a lot and they die.